Good stuff. United Kingdom has changed me. I've been here for 4 years now, and it's amazing what I've experienced and learned, and how little quirks about me have changed since I've been here. I was born and raised in the United States, specifically the Western United States, and I moved to England in 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic. When I was a teenager, there was this video series by a young woman who I can no longer remember the name of, and she was from the United States but was studying in London. When I would watch her videos, I was inspired, and I remember thinking to myself, perhaps one day I'll spend some time in England, perhaps one day I will live there. I never really thought much of that, and in fact, the first time I actually did visit England back in 2017, I actually didn't care for it that much. There was something I just didn't like about it. And in fact, I think I specifically remember telling my mother that of the countries I had been to, it was one of my least favorite. Now, fast forward, and in 2018, I spent about 3 months in England. And it was during that time that I met my wife. And after about 3 months of being in England, I had had enough of being here, and I thought I would never return to here. England wasn't my favorite place, but I had fallen in love. When I finally completed my visa in 2020 and I moved to England, I wondered if I would struggle in the same way I did when I was here for just those few months. I wondered if I would hate the same things. I wondered how I would adjust. One thing I've always been a true believer of when it comes to immigration is that when you immigrate to somewhere, you do what you can to assimilate into that culture. So I wondered, how could I, who's with my American background, assimilate to the British ways of doing things? And to my surprise, I did. And here I am, 4 years later, and in every way, I am happy to be here. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things I don't like about England. There's a lot I would change. There's a lot of things I get homesick about at times. And the journey of falling in love with this country has not been an easy one. But after 4 years, this has truly become home to me in many ways. And there's many benefits of living in the United Kingdom that I really treasure, and that I think are very important to life. There's a certain pace here, a certain quality of life that respects work-life balance, to where you very much so feel like you are safe to not have to devote your life to your profession. The reservedness of the people, it brings a certain peace to where you are. It's cozy, and as you can see with the Christmas decorations around me, it's a nice environment this time of year. So I do love England, but I also love the United States. And there are times that I miss the United States. And there are things that I miss about the United States. But one of the things that's difficult for me after 4 years away is that when I go back, the United States is not what it used to be. Unfortunately, the United States that I grew up in no longer exists. I do understand that a video like this might be tough for somebody who is American, because you're taught a certain patriotism, and unfortunately that patriotism can go a little overboard, where you find it difficult to find fault in your own country, or you find it difficult to take criticism towards your own country. But I'm here to tell you that one of the foundations of democracy is being able to freely criticize your government and freely criticize your country. That is the First Amendment at work, freedom of speech. Anyone who says otherwise, in my opinion, is acting in an un-American way. There's so many positives about the United States, from the friendliness of the people, how easy it is to make friends in the United States. Houses are large in the United States, and you have modern amenities like air conditioning. And one that I always bring up to British people is the fact that we have great washers and dryers for clothes in the United States. And there's so many little things like that. But the United States falls short in areas that other first world countries do not. And I find that many Americans are blind to it. They don't want to accept it. And they're taught a lie that the things that other first world countries enjoy are either forms of socialism or communism. I have not found this to be the case. In the years that I've been here, I have never once felt that my freedoms have been less than what they were in the United States. In fact, I could almost say that my freedoms have actually been more in England than the United States. But that depends on what you consider to be free. Now, if you've watched other videos about Americans explaining their lives in Europe and other countries, Australia, places like that, you will have heard them say what I'm about to say. There's a difference between freedom from and freedom to. So, for example, in the United States, you have the freedom to own a firearm. And I grew up in that culture. I've owned firearms before. I've fired many different varieties of firearms. I've had training in firearms and gun safety. I do understand the culture because I grew up in that. And you have a freedom in the US to own these weapons. That is not such an easy thing to achieve somewhere like England. Not just anybody can own a firearm. And even those who can are very limited on what they can own. You see, you might look at that as you're being controlled by the government when you think you're not allowed to own these guns. That's what I would expect an American to think. But the reality is, they aren't needed. You see, you might think you might need the guns to do an uprising against your government. Well, that may have stood true in the end of the 18th century, when the most advanced rifle technology that existed was rifled muskets. Now, I used to own a black powder rifle, which is more advanced than a musket from the time that most likely would have been flintlock. And even this caplock musket that I owned that was the same style of an 1850s version, it took me about 40 seconds to load a single shot into that gun. That's not something that you overrun the government with in the modern age. Even the modern weapons that civilians have in the United States would not do anything to an Abrams tank, or an F-16, or a nuclear warhead. See, the world has changed. Technology has changed. And it's changed how we do everything. One of the greatest lies that people say about the US Constitution is that it can't change, and it should not be changed. The reality is, the Constitution was designed to be changed. That's why there's amendments to the Constitution. And I won't go too much into history there because that's not what this is about. But the point is that the right to bear arms doesn't really do any good in a modern age. But don't get me wrong, I love going to the gun range. I love firing guns at targets. But I'm not against a culture that does not want to have them. And here in England, the majority of people do not understand why Americans need these weapons. I can't blame them for that. And if you think about it, the chances of being shot and killed in the United States are so much higher than they are here. And most places in the world, the chance of being killed in general is higher in the United States than it is here in England. There are other stats that are similar. For example, the US is a car-centric culture. I know a lot of people in the US that think mass transit shouldn't be a thing, and they're against roundabouts, other things like that. What they don't understand is mass transit creates less traffic on the road. Roundabouts make roads safer because you're moving at a slower speed. Don't quote me on this, but I believe the stats were that you are something like 4 or 5 times more likely to die in a car accident in the United States than you are here in England. Healthcare. Healthcare is very expensive in the US. If you don't have health insurance, you have to pay out of pocket, and that can be anywhere from thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on what's happening to you. Yes, you have the freedom to buy private health insurance. You also have that freedom in England. For example, I have a private dentist here in England. If I wanted to, I could get private health insurance if maybe I wanted to be seen a little bit quicker. For me, it's not necessary because of the NHS, the National Health Service. I don't have to worry about things like health insurance. I don't have to worry about paying to go see the doctor. I don't have to worry about medication costs that might be through the roof. You see, in England, I have freedom from those things. Where in the US, you have freedom to do certain things. But unfortunately, I find that a lot of the freedoms that people so desire in the United States are based around fear. They want to use guns because they're afraid of government. They refuse to have universal healthcare systems because somehow they believe that it's communist. There's so many fears that control what Americans do, at least in the conservative landscape that I grew up in. Now, to the average American, I probably would sound quite liberal saying these things, but if I were to be honest with my views to the majority of the rest of the world, you would find that my views are complex. There's a lot of gray area. I don't belong to a club. I don't choose sides. I don't play those games. After living here in the United Kingdom, where I've enjoyed being under the NHS and the ease of life that's brought me. You see, I don't think Americans actually understand how difficult they have it in some ways. For example, the IRS. As an American citizen, I still have to file my taxes every year, even if I do not make any money in the United States. I still have to file my taxes. That's not a thing in most of the rest of the first world. In fact, unless you are self-employed in the UK, government does your taxes for you. I don't have to go and file my taxes every year or fear being arrested. I don't have to live under that type of tyranny of a strange bureaucracy that is decades behind the rest of the world. The government takes care of it. In fact, they even let me know what my taxes went towards. And if I overpaid in taxes, they send the money back to me, which they have done. Another shock with that is that many Americans would probably believe that I must pay extortionate amounts of my income here in taxes. Well, unfortunately, I did the math. And the US tax system is very complicated. You have to understand you've got your federal tax, depending where you live, state tax. And if you really wanted to, you could throw some other taxes on top of that. But when it comes down to it, I found that I was actually paying more for taxes in the United States than I do in England. At the time I did the calculation, for the same income, I was paying 6% more of my income in taxes in the United States. So when I've lived abroad and I've seen these things, and you grow up being told that the United States is the greatest nation in the world, and you discover that that's not so true. Or at least it's not true anymore. Sure, the US may have the most powerful military, which unfortunately has been abused. Young men have been sent and died to countries that never should have been invaded. Yes, the US military is huge. Yes, they have a massive arsenal of nuclear weapons. And yes, the US is still currently like the world police. And trust me, I'm a massive history nerd. I very much so have a lot of respect for some of the things the US did. Following World War II, the US really did a lot to rebuild the world from what had occurred. But it's been 80 years since those days. The US is not the same as it was back then. You see, if you look at the time of World War II and you look at where the US was at, it was a very progressive country compared to the country that we see today. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is my personal favorite president. I've read memoirs from soldiers who fought in World War II who will say he's the only president that ever cared about the working man. And you see that in some of his decisions. Now, whether you agree with him or not, he helped create federal minimum wage. He helped create Medicare and Medicaid, the only social health care that the US really has. He tried to push for more. He created the GI Bill, allowing soldiers to get free education. What an amazing thing. And what a great gift to those who've served. But these are progressive things, created in a different time. The same mindsets that created those systems are often mocked by conservatives today. Yet those progressive systems make the quality of life in many European countries and other first world countries amazing. Maternity leave. My wife's pregnant. Big news. We're very happy about it. The maternity leave benefits that she gets are amazing. She gets to take well beyond half a year off and still gets money. Time that she can be at home to raise our child. There is no federally required maternity leave in the United States. There is no federally required paid holiday in the United States. Here in England, you get at least 20 days plus bank holidays. So what ends up being that you get at least 28 days. And I can't remember the specifics of how the government works it off the top of my head, but I believe the way it works is you're supposed to be able to take 6 weeks off a year without losing your income, which is amazing. And many jobs here in England give more than that. I get more than that at my current job. It's an amazing benefit, and it's something that is normal to people here. Yet when I got my first job here in England and they told me how much paid time I'd get, I was amazed. Usually only union and federal jobs in the US get benefits like that. I've never been a server myself, but when I see the tipping culture in the US, I go, how unfair is that? Pay your staff. You see, in my time away from the US, I've really realized that Americans are being robbed by their own country, and yet they refuse to face it. They think everything's fine. They refuse to accept the criticisms that would help their nation be better. And you are often outcasted if you do bring any criticism into that conversation. I had a funny moment where an American called me a traitor, and by all means, he was serious. He called me a traitor because I had moved to England, because I wasn't in the United States. And funny enough, the conversation was regarding cars. For some reason, this gentleman thought that everyone needed to have large vehicles. I told him that you don't. It's okay to have a smaller car if that's what you want. He didn't like that. And I had a good laugh when he called me a traitor. I thought it was really ironic to hear those words. Because the United States is a country founded on rebellion, founded on being traitors to the crown. It's literally in the DNA of what the United States is. So in a way, I take it as a compliment. I'm considered a traitor for disagreeing with the way that my nation's government does things. And so be it. That's what the founding fathers did. At least I'm more like them. But I've said enough about politics and opinions. You see, these are just reflections I've had as I've looked back on the last 4 years and how I now see the United States from where I'm at now. And every time I go back to the US, I'm happy to be home. It will always be home. But I'm sad to see what it's become. I'm sad to see that I spent so much of my life living under so many of the lies that were taught to us. Now, don't get me wrong. This video may make it seem like I think the US is horrible. I don't. I love the United States. The United States is still a very great country. There's a lot of great people in the United States. A lot of good things in the United States. It's a very diverse country, a huge country. Every state, you can almost think of it like its own country. If you're in California or Texas, Louisiana, North Dakota, every state is so different in how they do things. And so in some of these opinions, please understand that they may not apply to you at all, because you might actually be more on board with what I'm saying, or you might be completely against me. Either way, I do feel that Americans have been robbed. Another thing that is difficult in the United States, and this has to do with the paid time off as well, is that strong work culture. Now, one good thing about this is that it did give me a strong work ethic, and I am grateful for that. But sometimes I wonder at what cost. No human being should be having to do 11 to 12-hour shifts on a regular basis. No human being should have to do that to afford what they need to afford in life. No human being should have to work 2 or 3 jobs. In the 4 years I've lived and worked in the United Kingdom, I have never worked a weekend, and I have rarely ever worked over 40 hours in a week. And any time that I have, I've either gotten that time back in time off, or I've gotten overtime, and it's usually been my choice on which I get. This very year, I had worked some hours over, and because the hours I had worked over had added up to a full day, 8 hours, I was able to take an entire extra day off of work without losing any pay, because that's how they do things here. They understand that you're a human being. If I need to go to the doctor or the dentist, an appointment for my wife's pregnancy, my work is so flexible. They always let me go to the appointments. And in fact, there are many jobs in this country that don't even dock your pay for that. They understand that you have to go to these things. Humans need to do things outside of work. We need to sleep. We need to live. We need to enjoy the world around us. They help us be more productive as humans. In the US, I feel that overworking is celebrated. Busyness is celebrated. And I don't look at that in the same anymore. When I meet someone who's always productive and never stopping and always trying to fill their time with something, although I tend to do that because of the way I grew up, I don't look at it as a good thing anymore. Stop, smell the roses, look at the trees, enjoy the time you have on this earth. Now, perhaps in the future, I'll make a video about the things I don't like about the United Kingdom, because trust me, there are things I do not like about this country, and there's a lot of criticisms I could say about England as well. So please understand that this video is specifically about how I see the US now that I've lived abroad for the years that I have. And unfortunately, there are a lot of negatives that I see. There's a lot of things I wish were different in the US. There's a lot of things that I feel were just nationalist propaganda that was fed to me. And I'm grateful for the perspective that my life abroad and my travels have given me. The US is a great country, and I think the US could have a very good and successful future. The US does need to change, and until it does, I think I will be much happier on this side of the world. Because you can have a bigger house and a bigger car, all these material things, but the pace of life, the peace that I've had here, it is worth it all. I have more than enough. I live in a beautiful home. I own a great car. I don't even need the car half the time. Even today, I went to the center of the city I live in. It took me 15 minutes on the train. We're strong and healthy. We feel secure. We feel free. And it brings me back to that thing of, what do you value? Do you value freedom to or freedom from? And the reality is you may want the freedom to compared to the freedom from, and that's okay. See, that's the wonderful thing about this video is I'm giving these opinions. You may not like them. They are really just my opinions. They're just my thoughts. I'm not the greatest or smartest person of the greatest understanding of how these things work. These are just my thoughts. I've been very fortunate, and I do understand that. And I do speak from a place of a certain amount of privilege in how I got to grow up and where I got to grow up and the things I've gotten to experience. There are many people who would probably look at it differently than me. But here's to hoping, praying that the United States will improve itself and that it will once again become a shining light and a land of opportunity, not just for those who are wealthy, but for the everyday people, the lower and the middle class, simple people. Because let's be honest, that's the majority of us. Very few of us who are millionaires, even a smaller percentage of people on the earth that are billionaires. Most of us are just normal people. And I think we need a world that works best for normal people. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. It's been on my heart for a while to make videos about my time here. I've had quite a few friends ask me to make videos about my experiences. I do realize I have a unique perspective, being an American who's lived abroad for these years. And so I thought I would finally share my thoughts. This is my first full-length YouTube video on this subject I've done. If you've seen my channel before, I did a lot of gaming videos, and I've also been doing some short videos on different platforms. But I was very happy to do a longer video like this. I feel it's a much more intimate setting. I feel I'm able to express my thoughts a lot more. If you've ever done short videos, it's so difficult trying to put your thoughts into something so compact. I often find that I just end up saying the wrong thing. So thank you so much for watching. Would love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your experiences, whether you agree or disagree. And I'll see you next time.